My name is Millie and I'm 30 years old. I married my husband, Stephen, 5 years ago. He's 5 years older than me and works for a leading corporation. When we first got married, he was calm, patient, and incredibly kind. A true partner in every sense. We were overjoyed when we found out we were expecting our first child during our first year of marriage. It felt like the peak of happiness. However, things started to change after I left my job due to the pregnancy. Stephen, who had always been gentle and understanding, began to act differently. When my morning sickness was particularly severe, I couldn't get out of bed. I ended up dozing off until late afternoon. When Stephen came home, I explained what happened, expecting some understanding. Instead, he snapped at me, something that had never happened before. "What were you doing at home all day? Do you think I'm stupid? Morning sickness isn't an illness. You're just being lazy. I've been working all day. Now hurry up and make dinner." From that day on, Stephen's criticism became a daily occurrence. No matter how hard I tried to keep up with the housework, it was never good enough for him. "Can you even manage something this simple? You really are an idiot," he would say, his words cutting deeper each time. "I don't know how you manage to survive being this stupid. You really don't know anything, do you? What can you even do?" If I dared to argue even just a little, he would lose his temper entirely, cursing and belittling me until I felt like I couldn't speak up anymore. Whenever I tried to share my thoughts, he would shut me down with a cold, "I don't care what you think, so just shut up." I was shocked by how much my husband had changed. At first, I tried to convince myself that he was just having a bad day, that the kind man I married would come back once our baby was born. Those hopes faded quickly. Even after our child was born, Stephen never returned to the caring husband I once knew. Yet, despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate him. I loved him too much to admit that my marriage might have been a mistake. Looking back, anyone would say I was being harassed, that Stephen had simply shown his true colors after our marriage. But at the time, I couldn't see it. I blamed myself, thinking I wasn't good enough, and began to fear that he would eventually abandon me. 5 years have passed like this. We now have 3 beautiful children, but Stephen only gives me $500 a month for living expenses. We live in company housing, so rent is deducted from his salary, and our utility bills are paid directly from the bank. Stephen insists that $500 is more than enough, but with the cost of milk, diapers, groceries, and daily necessities, it's barely enough to get by. I've had to dip into my savings from before we were married, but those have now run out, leaving us in a very difficult situation. When Stephen comes home from work and sees the cheap dinners I've prepared, his anger only grows. When Stephen sat down at the dinner table and saw what I had prepared, he sneered, "What is this? This is dinner. Can't you cook something more decent? You're home all day doing nothing, and this is the best you can manage. Can you even cook a proper meal?" I tried to explain that I didn't have enough money to buy better ingredients, but his response was cold and dismissive. I give you money for living expenses every month. It's a housewife's duty to make ends meet. That's what real housewives do. You really can't do anything right, can you? Stop wasting my money, you parasite." His yelling seemed endless. On top of everything, Stephen had been having an affair for years. At first, he tried to hide it, meeting his lover in secret, but lately he didn't even bother to conceal it. Despite all of this, I found myself still afraid that he might leave me. It was as if I had been completely brainwashed by him. Every day I was overly sensitive to Stephen's moods, and the only comfort I found was in watching my children grow. But even that small solace was tainted by the reality of our situation. I wanted to dress my children in cute clothes, but I couldn't afford to buy any. When my mom friends invited me to lunch or tea, I had to decline because I simply couldn't afford it. It was one thing for me to miss out, but I felt terrible for my children. Stephen would always claim that $500 was plenty for any housewife to make ends meet. Yet the moms around me seemed to live without a hint of struggle. They were always well-dressed, lively, and their children seemed happy too. With each passing day, I lost more confidence in myself, believing that I was a failure as a mother and that everything was my fault. But then, one day, I made a bold decision. I confided in one of my closest mom friends about what was happening at home. When she heard my story, she was genuinely shocked. "None of this is your fault, Millie. Your husband is completely wrong. What he's doing is harassment, plain and simple." I had never even considered that Stephen's actions could be harassment. "There's absolutely nothing wrong with you, Millie," she continued. "You're neither stupid nor incompetent. You're a wonderful mother." Her kind words gave me the courage I needed. I decided it was time to stand up for myself and negotiate with Stephen for more money to cover our living expenses. When I broached the topic with him, his reaction was as harsh as ever. "What are you talking about? I'm giving you more than enough. When are you going to stop wasting all my money?" "But the kids are getting older," I explained. "There are things they need, and I need money to spend time with their friends' mothers too." "Not a chance," he snapped. "You just stay home. Take care of the kids and do the housework. Don't try to act all high and mighty when you're so incapable." His yelling upset the children, and they started crying. "Shut them up," he barked. Before I even realized it, the words slipped out of my mouth. "I want a divorce." I was shocked at myself. I had never thought about it seriously before, but now it just came out. Stephen looked stunned for a moment but quickly regained his composure. "Do you really think you're in a position to demand that, you parasite? Fine, I'd be glad not to see your miserable face anymore, but you're going to pay back every penny you've squeezed out of me." He started calculating. "That's $500 a month, so $6,000 a year, which makes it $30,000 over 5 years. And of course, I'm keeping the children. Get the $30,000 ready, and then you can leave on your own." With that, he stormed out of the house like nothing had happened. I collapsed on the floor, hugging my crying children as tears streamed down my face. My youngest was only 11 months old. How could I possibly come up with $30,000? But even more pressing than the money was the need to protect my children and figure out our next steps. I felt like I would rather die than be separated from my children, but I no longer had the confidence to endure life with such a terrible husband. Overwhelmed by the situation, I finally reached out to my mom. My dad had passed away while I was in college, and the house where I grew up no longer exists. My mom now lives with my brother and his wife, which made it difficult for me to rely on her. I had always hesitated to burden her with my problems, but now I had no choice. When I told her what had been happening, she was upset and chastised me for not coming to her sooner. I heard her crying on the other end of the line. She assured me that both my brother and his wife were deeply concerned and insisted that I come to their house as soon as possible. Before I left, Mom advised me to gather evidence of Stephen's infidelity, so I started documenting his actions, including receipts for gifts and brand name products he bought for his lover, as well as hotel receipts for their stays together. I collected credit card statements and other evidence as Stephen was careless with his paperwork. Mom hired a lawyer to handle the legal matters. The lawyer spoke with Stephen, who was adamant that he didn't want a divorce, even if we were to live separately. He insisted on retaining custody of the children, which made me realize that this process would be lengthy and complicated. I began preparing to move the children to my brother's house. But as this was unfolding, we received unexpected news. Stephen had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. Fortunately, it was detected early, and the doctors said it could be treated with surgery. Stephen was admitted to the hospital for the procedure. Without him at home, life felt incredibly peaceful and refreshing. I experienced a calmness that I hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps it was because I finally had a moment to breathe and focus on my own well-being and that of my children. Notice that with the stress of Stephen's absence, I had become more cheerful, and my children seemed livelier and happier than usual. Seeing them so well and thriving only strengthened my resolve to get a divorce. I had no regrets about leaving a husband who claimed his cancer was a result of the stress caused by my actions. Determined to raise my children on my own and ensure their happiness, I felt ready to move forward with my life. Then unexpectedly, Stephen's attitude softened. He expressed a willingness to divorce me, claiming that his cancer and the threat to his life had made him realize he wanted to start fresh. He wanted to reset his life and leave behind what he deemed unnecessary, including me and our children. It was clear that even in such a dire situation, Stephen's focus was solely on himself. I was taken aback by his callousness, particularly his dismissive attitude towards our children. Despite this, I saw no reason to reject this opportunity to finalize the divorce. I acted quickly to complete the process before Stephen could change his mind. He no longer seemed to care about maintaining a relationship with the children, so I asked him to sign a pledge stating that he would never see them again. While this arrangement was convenient for me as it meant I would not receive child support, Stephen agreed to a substantial financial settlement. I also demanded compensation from his lover. Finally, I was able to finalize the divorce. Stephen, concerned about public perception, told his colleagues and neighbors that I was the one who left him as soon as he fell ill. I was frustrated by how selfish Stephen could be, but more than anything, I was relieved to be free from him. My life was finally beginning, and with a deep sense of happiness and liberation, I left the house where I had spent so many years with him. Shortly after my departure, I learned that Stephen had married the woman he had been seeing for years, who apparently worked under him at the office. I found a new apartment near my brother's house, where I'm raising the children with the support of my mother, brother, and his wife. I also secured a job. Though it has been challenging, I'm much happier now than I was before. 6 months later, my mom received a call from Stephen's father, which made me worry that something might have happened to him. I quickly called back to learn that Stephen had gone through another divorce. Fortunately, his cancer had not recurred, and he was in good health. Stephen had been living peacefully with his new wife, but it appears he started harassing her as well. She left him promptly and filed for divorce, making a public scene at their workplace, which led to Stephen's dismissal. He's now moved out of company housing, paid additional compensation to his ex-wife, and has no money left. He's returned to his parents' home, drained and defeated. Stephen is now saying he wants to see his children and start over with me. His father, unable to bear seeing Stephen in such a state, decided to reach out to me. I felt a surge of anger at the thought of Stephen's selfishness and the disruption he's caused. Finally free, I was stunned when Stephen appeared before me, as if from a ghostly apparition. After years of infidelity and his new marriage, he had been divorced within 6 months. Entirely his own fault. Now, instead of showing any remorse, he wanted to see his children and start over. Who did he think he was? Who was the parasite now? I was at a loss for words. Struggling to control my anger, I told Stephen I never wanted to see him again before hanging up. A few days later, as I was heading home from work, I was shocked to find Stephen waiting for me in a park near my house. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him. He looked pale and exhausted. For a moment, I didn't even recognize him. "Millie," he said. "I realize now that you're the only one for me. Our children need a father, right? I know a lot has happened, but we can start over. You must be having a tough time on your own, but I can help with the housework for a while." I couldn't contain my frustration. Start over? That's a joke. It might make sense for me to say that, but you have no right. I have no intention of rebuilding anything with you. I'm thrilled to be away from you. I don't care what's happened to you. And don't pretend you're doing me a favor. I'm far better off now than when I was married to you. Stephen stood there, stunned, his mouth hanging open. It was the first time I had ever spoken to him like this, so his reaction was understandable. "Just leave," I continued. "I don't know how long you've been here, but if you think you can waste your time like this, why don't you find a job or something? You're an adult. Don't have your dad follow me around. and if you come anywhere near me again, I'll call the police." With that, I walked away, leaving him standing there. Although I was scared and furious at his sudden appearance, seeing the look on his face actually made me feel better. My children and I haven't seen Stephen since, and we are living peacefully and happily. I believe there's still so much life ahead of us. I'm committed to staying positive and working hard until my children grow up.